do they focus on technology or were they
They,
survey?
these people were recommended by the technology program at the state level, Peter Drescher, as people who actually work on educational technology issues. That is their bailiwick, that's what they understand. And I think Jason will talk a little bit about Jeff's son. So yes, we felt really, really comfortable with, we didn't want just a technology person, we wanted somebody who really had an education bias to things.
That's a good point, Kevin. And when we were looking to get this report done, and talking with Peter Drescher, it really wasn't about what servers do you have, what does your wide area network look like, what's the internet access. It wasn't about the nuts and bolts. And Jeff was really clear, that's not my job. You do not want me writing that report, he told us. He said, I think you have qualified network administrators who could give you a list of all the hardware in your buildings, and we do. What it really came down to was, this is when you've been around a long time. I'm looking at the dates on here, I'm like, I have been around a long time. Back in '07, there was already an existing group that was meeting monthly, and their whole focus was about our wide area network, which is how do we actually get the internet between the buildings efficiently. Fairfield, when I was up there, we were not on fiber. We were using a little Fairpoint dial-up connection at one point, and then we had one T1 line in. I was the IT support. I was learning how to reboot everything, and so this first study came out of that idea. We have to take a look when we started looking at the pinks and the red studies that some of you were on those committees for. IT was seen as a low-hanging fruit. We can take a look at this, we can move forward on that. So the TIG group, Technology Integration Group, was also meeting at the same time, back in between '07 and '11, and they were talking about how do we use technology to impact learning, and Lucy Delaware from City School was really the driving force behind that. At that time, there was a facilitator, Diane Lemieux from Town School was facilitating that group, and she was also helping to facilitate the wide area network group. And Martha, you were at those meetings too, so if I get it totally wrong, just jump in at any time. From that, we kind of hit a wall on the wide area network is up and running. We were able to get a second T1 line up to Fairfield. It wasn't great, but it was okay. I was able to talk with the network admin down at Town School, and talk to Juan. He would walk me through how to support Power School on my end, so I wouldn't take out too much data when I had to move a kid out of the system. And then it was time to do a study. At that time, the pink conversation happened, and we did the first study in 2010. Charlie Wilson, Sandra Latham, and I had to dig out of my archives, came up, and they did take a look at all those pieces. And at the same time that was going on, Alan Steele had a relationship with Vince Ganell from Chittenden Central Supervisor Union. And Vince came up about 6 months later to dissect that study even more, to look at some of the recommendations that came out of Charlie's study. And Charlie Wilson, the first study, he was recommending that we add staff, not just use the staff we had. We weren't in a position to do that, but we were able to kind of pilot using a shared help desk out of Essex. And I think Fairfax was in on that as well a little bit. One of the things that struck me as I was looking through both the report you have and the other ones is a phrase that Vince had shared with us throughout the whole thing. And he said, "You're missing a tip of the spear." He goes, "I'm a military person, you're missing the tip of the spear. Who is the person who decisions are coming through? Who is the person who is looking out for the entire SU?" And that is one of the reasons why we really didn't go anywhere with this. Because when Diane left, that void of facilitating wasn't there. And it really did become each school was doing what they needed to run their school and do it well. And so we were doing a lot of one-offs. If we needed something in Power School for a report card at Town School, we would do it. If Fairfield needed something, they would do it. We all were doing our own thing. Now, Charlie's study recommended that we have an IT director. They recommended we have a technology integration group to look at the vision and mission of our IT, where are we going with educational technology. They looked at the idea of you need a district tech plan. We had just been checking the box for E-rate, that we had plans and we were just continuing those plans forward. They were recommending coordinating data management versus what we were doing, which is each person was doing their own thing. We had point people in each building that would just take care of that, whether it be student data in VCAT, or whether it be upgrading the web presence. That we did do. That was something that we were able to tick off that box when Kevin came on board. It became a priority that we had to have a more unified web presence. So we're able to put together a group to do that. From 2010 through now, staff have done, I think the IT staff have done a phenomenal job of collaborating when they think to. If someone is putting in new servers, if someone is putting something new in or they want to expand, they reach out to each other on what we call our Slack channel, which is an online group that we have, and they throw it up on Slack and they talk and communicate that way to see if someone else has done it or they're interested. It's not foolproof. As you see with the purchase requisitions coming through, we don't have unified purchasing. We order one model of Chromebooks, the high school orders another, city orders another, Fairfield does one as well. So there are opportunities for improvement. As of now, back to Vince, that tip of the spear, there isn't that person really to get us going. So what I found really interesting in this study were just some of the overlaps that happened from 9 years ago to now. And we'll talk more about those, but just to kind of let you know, some of the ones that were there in Vince's study that overlapped were the IT director. Jeff's talking about who's coordinating at the district level here. Creating a vision for digital learning. Having a district level committee to come together and do some of that work. Developing student digital skills. All those things were from 2010, 2011 as well. Clarifying the role of IT integrationists. What was that? Back then it was just identify IT integration coordinators. So there's a lot that we knew was probably going to reemerge, but it was really nice to hear, as I was reading the report, it was someone unbiased, someone not in our district, and this is what they do. And there are still some residual things about territorialness around IT, around how that works. I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't there. Everyone builds their servers the way they want their children to be, and then they protect them as they can. But as you can see with, I think with the Power School, even in something as simple as the latest rollover, we all realized a few weeks ago that we had some conflicts in the contacts. So now we're all re-verifying. And we got that right because we all stumbled upon it and talked, and we were able to do it at one time, so the community was seeing that happening. So that's a little bit of the history. I'm glad to try to answer any questions around that. Just kind of want to lay the landscape of we have kind of plowed this earth before, and now it really feels like it's time to move forward. And it was part of the 5-year plan, and this was kind of the point we wanted to look at it to continue to improve.
And that's a great point. It was filed in our 5-year plan 3 or 4 years ago to look at this and to take it seriously and to do the research necessary. So to piggyback off what Jason talked about, Jeff came in. Jeff was very thorough, came in and talked to all the techies. Initially, we had a meeting with Jason and myself and techies and to see where the scope of the research needed to go. He asked some really good questions, and then we let him pretty much run the show at that point. He came back relatively often. He did forums with parents, forums with kids, teachers, trying to get the lay of the land in all of the schools. Talked to administrators too, and really truly got the big picture. I think we were all pretty pleased with the fact that he was thorough in the different schools. He came up with, you will probably see in there some wins and some things that we needed to work on. And the one thing I was pleased to see I didn't completely expect it, was basically we have the fundamental structures to do what we need to do. We have the players, we fund it well, but he came up with 7 recommendations for things that we're not particularly doing well at, or certainly need to look at. And I will, Brenda, if you could put up those 7 recommendations. Bill and Jason and I are gonna tag team on this. The first one, interestingly, is when he talked to us, he came back and talked to us about his recommendations. And he said if we had one foundational challenge, it was number 1. And then he felt that number 1 was foundational for everything else. That right now there was no coordination of any aspect of our digital learning, of our technology. Whether it be the network, servers, instructional technology, vision, what type of computers we use, all those type of structures, supervision, help me out.
I think
Even
data systems.
Data systems,
Systems for human interfaces in the data systems, which is very different things of how people use the data and how they report the data, and how that interfaces with to support data-driven decision-making for instruction and curriculum and assessment.
I thought you mentioned too, agreement on what kind of skills students should have.
yeah,
Yeah.
which comes under the vision and stuff too, but yes, the curriculum. What should all students know and be able to do? So the missing part was that coordination. So good things were happening at every one of the schools, but good but different things. And that certainly didn't help when all of our kids were then being funneled into BFA with different ideas of different skills and knowledges that they had at those levels. So his first thing that he spent a lot of time on was there needs to be some person who has the passion, who has the skill level, who can look at that overall program. And then 2 through 7 could be taken from there and discussed. And we would need a discussion on that. Whether we believe some of this could be done, how fast it could be done, how much is it gonna cost us. But if you didn't have that initial person, we thought there'd be an issue.
So this number 1 that's what you refer to as the tip of the spear? Is that?
That is the analogy that Vince used 9 years ago, and it's also what Jeff said. In talking to Jeff, he said if I were to do anything, as Kevin said, that would be it. And he did put these in rank order of how you get the most forward movement on your district as a whole when it comes to educational technology.
So having a person specifically to oversee this, as it were.
And I would add, he was pleasantly surprised at what he found. And he did put that in the report if you had a chance to read through. He said, given other school districts, you have a lot going for you. Where you're really losing is that you don't have that coordination. So all that good stuff you've got is willy-nilly.
So what does Alan Steele do?
Do you want to answer
I
that?
will start. He coordinates work at BFA as what I would say as a technology coordinator around hardware and software use.
Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people for the IT staff for the high school, right? So it says there's a director of integration specialists, there's 2 or 3 technology specialists, and then a data entry person, I mean, that's what it says, is all I can say. But if he's the director of information services, wouldn't that,
No.
so I mean,
I mean,
when you say the director of information services, I wouldn't just think that that's somebody taking care of hardware and software.
I'm giving you what I've seen on the ground. I've held this position as a director of technology, and I came from the integration side. But I had to know how to run the servers and how to run the data systems as well. And so, that, to me, a technology director has to have curriculum background as well and teaching background. That's my bias.
I would agree with that.
There's some that don't,
But Joanna, what
We have lots
You're-
of people there. I mean, at the school.
you're
So-
talking maybe 4 steps down the road, which is where we need to go for next steps. If we have these people, is a better way of utilizing
Utilizing them, yeah,
on that stuff. Because at this point, it isn't being utilized correctly.
okay.
And do we have the right people in there who even have those skills right now to do everything? And to be that well-rounded generalist who can coordinate. And that's what we'll get into as we go further down on the recommendations. So we're gonna just tag team down number.
So I have number 2, which is to create, clarify the district level mission vision for digital learning at Maple Run. And I've worked with Jeff Sun before. I mean, I wasn't here when he did this, but I really respect Jeff. I believe the mission of the digital learning is to support the overall mission and vision for the district. It's not one and different, but it's not that the technology drives that work, it's the technology's support as to what the overall mission is. And I know Jeff would say that. When you come to it from a technology point of view, you start to think about what's our vision for the technology side of that. And it's really, how does it impact the classroom and do the staff have the knowledge that they need to be able to impact the students?
So it's not an end,
It's not an end, it's a means to get to the end of what the overall mission, what it says up there on the wall.
And that's where number 3 then comes in his report, and it is going back to, I keep saying it, but this is back to 2007, when we had that technology integration group, and that was the focus. It wasn't about hardware or software. It really was about who at the district needs to be at the table to talk about how do we move forward students demonstrating their understanding of learning in a variety of means. And that was a forum to do it, and almost a test lab to bring back and try new things in your building. And broadening that is really what Jeff is talking about in this report, is making sure that you bring in community members, making sure you're including families, taking a look at, again, not the hardware and software, is really clear in here. That's not what that group needs to do. That group has to be about the learning and what are those opportunities and how do you actualize that. And that is something that we do in small pockets in our building. Our folks call our integration specialist, BFA's folks talk to their integration specialist. Those folks do not get together in a systemic way and have a guiding process towards actualizing our vision. Oh, that's me, I keep going tonight.
Yeah, you go.
This is more than I've talked to this board in years. So the other thing that did exist, particularly at an adult level, and I see this kind of in that same realm, is what are the digital skills that as a Maple Run Unified District, we believe and we know we want all kids to have. This ties into the 8 to 9 transition. How are we getting these kids prepared, these students prepared for going out after high school, into careers or into college? And that doesn't start in 9th grade, it starts all the way back when they're in pre-K. And how do we get that scope and sequence collectively as Maple Run so that it doesn't look different in Fairfield than it does at City, than it does at Town? And right now, I bet you, if we were to ask our teachers to make a list, they would all be extremely different, because there hasn't been that work, there hasn't been that coordination of what needs to be in those lessons.
And I would say that is an end result
Yeah.
of technology versus how do we use it to assist in other learning opportunities.
It's also person dependent, right? So if you have one teacher in a classroom that happens to have a lot of great technology skills, then they don't have the integrationists come into their room as much. And then if you have another teacher that doesn't have a lot of technology skills, then that person is, hopefully highly supported by technology integrationists.
And we have those folks who do struggle, who aren't really, this is my wheelhouse, this is where I want to go. If you can at least give them a guiding document, you can give them guidance on where they can go, it gets them to begin to think about their work as they're planning lessons and they're in the classroom where they see their colleague doing something.
Which was really a good segue into 5, which is to work with building principals to clarify that role, and that role should be the same in every building around an integration specialist. So right now we have integration specialists in each school. He mentions that Fairfield right now, because of its structure, has a little bit less time with a integration specialist there, and that needs to be looked at. But
Can I ask, how can that person be a 40%? Are they doing something else in the school, or are they truly a?
it's the art teacher at Fairfield who
Okay.
happens to have technology experience.
Okay.
So it was a good way for Sean. Sean had a brainstorm a few years ago and said, we keep losing art teachers because they're not full-time people. And now we happen to have somebody who has technology experience. So let's make him full-time and give him some of that time to support. Made all the sense in the world, but it's still, at this point, it's not as much as it was felt in the report that Fairfield needs.
So from an equity standpoint,
Right.
the report felt they needed a.
Right. And if you're looking at it from a centralized, equitable thing, then the one thing you're gonna look at is that with Fairfield. So, and it's not only that, but it's also, when he talks in the report, he talks about the use of an integration specialist. That are used slightly different in each places. And he's recommending that integration specialist is not necessarily somebody who works with kids. It's somebody who's supporting teachers in professional development, so they then can work with the students. Because as Joanna mentioned, you've got people at all different levels in your schools, and that specialist would be able to bring them up to speed, do what needs to be done.
Well, we do have a curriculum director, so you could perhaps use the curriculum director and some of the integration specialists and a fair number of people involved in IT too. And then you could have teachers involved also. And you'd have a nice cohort of people working on this. I hope you're not thinking of hiring a new person.
Well, I think that's something we're gonna have to talk about, because what he's saying, which is exactly true, is there's absolutely nobody right now in the system that has the expertise in all those areas, who's specifically set up for doing that. You talk about the curriculum director, Sally, but the curriculum director, and it's no fault of hers, most curriculum directors are not technology specialists. So they don't have network experience.
Yeah, but they can put their collective
It can certainly help.
knowledge together.
The relative to curriculum, I agree. So that's the next step, is how do we go about doing that if we decide that's something that's important.
It did seem like there was 3 different uses of the technology specialists
Yes,
throughout the district. Yeah.
yes.
Sure, right, and that goes back to me saying, like, I would be interested to ask other high schools of proportionate size whether or not they had 5 people on staff for technology integration. My guess would be probably not. So
I'll tell you, at
if
high
you're,
school I just served at, Joanna, we had
yes, Bill,
6.
you had 6. Just people that went around helping people get on their computers properly and whatnot, is that what you mean?
Between support, help desk, network technologies, overseeing phone systems for U32, which is almost the same size as BFA, different grade configuration.
Not in Franklin County. I would
I
say.
can remember when
All
BFA
around Franklin County, because that's
had
not here.
the teachers doing it alone. That was
Absolutely, yeah.
disastrous.
Oh, yes, yeah, I'm not supporting that at all. I'm just wondering, and you know, I don't know any of these people, so I'm not trying to make this personal. I'm just wondering if it goes back to what you were saying, more so doing an inventory of the whole department, excuse me, and looking at what, you know.
And if you'll let us get to the next steps, I think you'll see
Absolutely,
that's.
I will.
I think you're,
Well, you just
You're ahead
answered
of
the
me.
question, so I went there, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of
those are good
I
questions.
hope you're not thinking about hiring somebody
No.
new, and instead of just throwing people at problems, I hope we're looking at, you know, what the problem is and looking
Yeah.
at all of our resources before we do that again.
Yep. About step 6.
So this is knowing how your students and your families access your IT systems and knowing the capabilities of it. That's changing exponentially day by day for folks. I mean, we still have families that don't, but I think that's becoming smaller and smaller, especially with the advent of smartphone technology in the past 3 to 5 years. And the way folks access folks spend more time on their phones than they do on computers. So it's that knowing how to service and who has access that way.
I think, as we've talked before, that it's going to be really important for us to get a good understanding of who does have access, who doesn't have access. I read in the report that it's going to be done in a confidential way, but I think there are lots of, my students were embarrassed that they were the only kids in their classes that didn't have phones when they were in high school. And my kids don't have smartphones, I don't think. And I don't think they're smart, but their phones. But again, we do live in, I've said this to you before, we live in Fairfield. When the wind blows, the power goes out. That means their homework isn't done. And I think that, you know, my kids wouldn't say that they're necessarily embarrassed, but, you know, when they say the teacher told me to get out my phone and look this up, I know as students they're embarrassed, and I think that they're not the only students, I mean, they've got their phones now, but that this impacts. Anyways.
Certainly finding out what the situation is a good idea.
That leads Susan into kind of the last one, 7, which it was a conversation we had with Jeff in the room, and we had folks from the high school, and we were all talking about what does a one-to-one computing environment mean, and having to define that at the K-8s in our middle school, and then Joan is there, and so is Satek, and Sean is pretty close, if not there, right, Sean? At least in your middle school devices?
We're fully one-to-one.
Right. Is that there are Chromebooks assigned to students that they use throughout their time there. That's not the case at the high school, so students are leaving from 8th grade into that 9th grade year, and that isn't happening. And one of the things that Jeff pointed out was the number of devices may be the right number at BFA that already exist in the building, but is that really how you're going to define what a one-to-one environment is? Because there are different devices in different places for different purposes. So going through a process where the high school is actually defining what does a one-to-one computing environment mean? Is that what we want? Is that what we want as that transition? And how do we build for that thoughtfully? Is that something that we need to do? Is that something we need to talk about as students walk out of 8th grade with a device? Do we start setting those devices on with them so that they are their devices that would then go back and forth home and school? That's one way people do it.
Yeah.
It's their device.
In Fairfield, are they taking them home, Sean?
No, they're one-to-one in that there is a computer for them in every classroom.
Yeah.
But we leave them in the classroom because they were getting damaged by toting them back and forth to the common school and all that other stuff. So they don't actually, they get a number assigned to them in every room. If I'm number 3, every room I go to, number 3 is mine.
So I would say that generally, I think I'm fairly fiscally conservative, you know, I'm concerned about our taxes. But I also think that, and I've said this to you before and Kevin, you know, as soon as our kids walk into high school, they're separated. They're separated by what classes they're able to take, you know, the whole 9 yards. And because it is, every child, for many of the classes, and certainly if they're on the college track, they need their own computer. They need internet access at home. I just barely heard that the Hideaway is open for 4 hours after school. I wasn't aware of that because prior to,
3 days a week.
3 days a week.
how many days?
3.
No. Well, it's better than nothing because, you know, again, for kids that don't have internet at home, an hour to get their homework done isn't enough time. My kids wouldn't be taking any AP classes if they didn't have.
I would add this, that the AP textbook is about $100 more than the computing device.
I was wondering, from.
Almost all textbooks are digital,
Okay.
are digital now these days. You buy it digitally.
The report seems to strongly suggest a better environment at BFA if the students had that in their hand from class to class and it wasn't on a cart. Do you have an opinion, Bill, as to
Yes, we put this in place 6 years ago. We found that we didn't have that much damage. We kept about a 10% extra device count above student count. We didn't need it. We were able to lower it down to about 4% for replacements and they happen. It just happens. It's part of running a good environment. Chromebook falls off the desk, screen's broken, come to the tech department, switch it out, barcode, keep going. You have maintenance agreements on them, so you take care of it. And it's part of the environment.
Right, I mean, but it could fall off whether it's coming off of a cart or.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
But I guess what I was asking is, are you in favor of switching to the students having their Chromebook with them throughout the day versus having to come in and take it
So
off?
I was in an environment where we did it from 4th grade on up, they could go home.
Okay. But my question is, are you in favor of bringing the high school?
Yeah,
Okay, I
the
didn't
whole
get
thing. K-12, sorry, I wasn't answering it directly. Yes. I would like, if I could make BFA do it tomorrow, I would from what I've seen.
Okay.
And Steve, I would say the same thing. My former job, I was principal of a pre-K-12 school. And our students from 6th grade up had their own computers and they could bring them home and there were certain protocols in place.
Right.
And I think it's worth looking at.
Well, I was just wondering, because obviously one of the things mentioned, students are in a myth, or some of them, at least because they don't have their phone or trying to make the case that absent, the Chromebook going with them, they've always got the phone. Well,
They don't all have a phone.
They don't all have a phone.
They don't all have a
And
phone.
they're not supposed to have their phone out.
But many do, but it's taking two tools away from them potentially versus at least we could offer them the Chromebook throughout the day versus having to rely on.
There's a lot of professional development that needs to go behind that gets that one-to-one. I want to make sure I say that. There's a lot of professional development that needs to be put in place before you go to the one-to-one environment.
Yes.
All right, it's just,
It's
so they're
not-
coming from an environment where they've got it though, from K through 8, and all of a sudden to cut it off, as was mentioned in the report, it seems like they've got less independence as high school students than they do as K through 8 students. That seemed to strike me as odd.
And BFA handles lots of things differently for technology-wise, from my experience. Like, my kids were used to using it, Google Docs over the summer, putting their work in, and that wasn't an option at BFA. Like, they don't have access to that email in the summer and not able to do that work. And so for kids who are looking for access to other ways, it's hard when you transition from 8th to 9th when you're doing your assignments over the summer and all of a sudden you're locked out of them. For some kids, that's really anxiety producing to have that. So to go from one school to the other with having those same, it would be nice to have that consistency.
Some kids and families.
Not me.
So, yeah, you're all seeing the issues. And they are good issues. What next steps for us, this is one of our goals, to be looking at this study that we have prioritized. And Joanna already stole my thunder. Is the next step is we need to look at what we presently have, and we have that audit, and we need to see how best we can utilize those. And do we have people presently who could take on the role of a coordinator, who've got everything that needs to take place in a coordinator? You've got to have more than just one of them. You've got to have network experience. You've got to have integration curriculum experience. You've got to be able to coordinate and work with people throughout the district and be able to see that big picture. and look at what we've got, and from there, see how we could do this. To have, because it was very obvious in all the studies that that's our first step, to look at how can we better coordinate. And that's a discussion that we've got to have with our leadership team and start talking what that would be. I generally agree with everybody. You just can't go out and hire one additional position without looking at the big picture and seeing what could be done. Is there something where we don't need? We've talked all the time in years past about repurposing positions, which we've been pretty successful on. And it's what saved us the money over the last 2 or 3 years. And that's what we've got to start looking at here. How can we repurpose? How can we get something in place where we've got that expert, that coordination, that then we can start looking at 2 through 7 and moving forward.
Did Nilda or Nina have a comment?
Yeah, I had a question. So I know that, a lot of good conversation, a lot of good folks that have the technology, that have some technology experts here and there throughout the district. Has there been a skill assessment done of those folks just to see what we do have available to us?
No, we haven't listed for each, that's kind of the next steps Kevin was talking about.
That's the audit.
What are we gonna do if we were to repurpose? Yeah, so for example, are there redundancies across network administrators that now that we're Maple Run don't have to exist anymore? Are there redundancies around database management that don't have to exist anymore now that we're Maple Run? We're not individual buildings.
Okay.
I would also add that, from my experiences working in the technology field for education, we need to look at also some of our systems, and some of the ways in which we do things are pretty personnel heavy, because we're doing them without doing modern technology, but you can't switch automatically just to the modern technology without the personnel support. You've got to have the personnel to make that happen, and then once you can, then you can start looking at either downsizing or making sure that positions roll the correct way. So there's some things that we can be doing in our internal systems that we're not doing across our schools that can make people much more efficient. But they would technology has a very high personnel intensive piece for implementation, and then you get your reward on the other side of that.
Part of this, and I didn't, maybe I did miss, I apologize, I didn't get a chance to go through the entire thing, but was there a technology inventory? Was all this inventory too, or is that part of the next step too?
This study wasn't focused on hardware and software inventory.
It was.
And that includes the network as well, or?
Correct.
Okay.
The IT department has that pretty well locked down, that we could get that report about who's running which switches in their building and who has what access points in that. I know that the network administrators have those types of documents right around.
Right.
So, and there's opportunity obviously to do licensing too, to consolidate licensing. Would that save any money?
Not a lot in my experience.
No.
The big places,
Yeah,
the big cost in IT is personnel, just like it is everything else in the system.
Nope. Yep. Thank you.
So as far as the 5-year plan goes, this has a block on it. Are we in year 1 of it, which is a planning stage?
This is a planning year. One of the goals that you'll see next week is discussion around the coordination. Because as we've mentioned, if we don't have the coordination from a K-12 level, we're gonna have a harder time planning 2 through 7. But yes, and this is gonna be a 5-year plan easily for multiple reasons. Some of this stuff costs money.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that was, my next question is, what can the board do to help with this?
We're not quite there yet. We would like to come back to you after this is the initial presentation. we'd like to come back after we've talked and after we've done an audit, so we have a better idea and specific ideas of where we are, what we can do, what we can do without, so that we can come back and say, this is how we'd like to move forward. And I would say, once again, the big issue is around the coordination. So we would like to come back with, this is the way we think we can get that coordination. And we can do that by repurposing something and looking at it from that direction. And is this, if these things are duplicative, then we don't need those things, and see from there. And we don't have all the answers to that yet.
Are you guys set? Cool. Anybody else have questions for Kevin or Bill or Jason? Okay. Thank you. Item 7G, board goals. I'm just looking for guidance on how we want to proceed in establishing some goals for the board. As Kevin said, the district has goals, and we'll be seeing them reprioritized next week. But I think it would be good for us to have some goals for the board, and I'm wondering what kind of process we should take to establish those.
I think that when we had our board retreat, that we identified some things that evening that would be great ideas, concepts for goals. So maybe we could do some homework that we kind of identify some and maybe email the ideas. Maybe they're not written out perfectly, for goals, but just at least the ideas and the concepts behind them to you.
Try to summarize this.
And then we could have some time to, air them.
Okay.
I don't know how other people feel about that.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's good to have some thought time.
Yep.
I guess, and I want to make sure that there's some clarification around the board's role and whatever the goal process is going to be. Like, obviously with the district goals, there are people who are responsible for those things. If the board has goals, how is that responsibility measured? How are we knowing that we're reaching those goals? What's our accountability there?
Yeah.
And so I just want to have that part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think any goal, if you have a goal, you have to have ways to monitor it, or else it's meaningless.
Just a wish.
But it might be one of the goals is to set up to have a discussion about what the board is about. The State Board of Ed is going through that right now. They're thinking about what is it that we're supposed to do based on agency changes and legislative changes. So it's not a bad conversation to have.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Okay, so I guess I would just leave it at, if people could do some homework, think about ideas that you would have for goals for the board, and send them to me. And, yeah.
We don't have notes from the retreat. Joanna, do you?
No.
I do.
Okay.
Is that a Sheila?
Oh, yeah, can I email that to you?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Can I ask a question, please?
of course.
So are we looking at coming up with some goal list that says at the end of X number of years, the board will do whatever? Or are we trying to come up with things that we want to learn about? Or are we trying to come up with something that is specific to each school that we want to know about? I'm having trouble. I'm happy to provide you some feedback. I just don't know what I'm feeding you back.
Yeah.
I want to I missed the retreat, so I didn't have the advantage of that conversation. But is it something we are supposed to do as board members, and then are we going to we're going to be monitoring ourselves, or are we going to be monitored? I'm just trying to understand where we're going with it.
Yep. I think it's goals of the board. So it's things that the board is going to do. It's not things that we're going to ask the district to do. In terms of monitoring, I guess it depends on what the goal is, because it could be that part of the monitoring is engaging the public and finding out what they think about something, or it may be asking the staff, have we gotten better at something?
Or it could be discussing it once a month, or.
Sure.
Could be on the
It just
agenda.
depends on what the goal is, I think, what
Right,
the
right.
monitors are gonna be. Does that make sense, Noah?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk it through a little bit because, I can think of things that I maybe would like to hear about every month, but that doesn't mean everybody else would like to hear about those, so it's not like we're looking to, pad our agenda or anything.
Right, and that I would say would not be, a goal for the board. But you certainly could send those ideas to me too.
Right. I mean, I think, one of the conversations that I've had, is that we always hear about all the good stuff that happens at all the schools and stuff, and we all know that everything is not the sunshine, lollipops, and roses, right? And sometimes it would be good to just hear what some of the challenges are at the school. And that we can then have, some awareness of what is challenging administrators or principals or whatever at schools, and then we could get, updates on that kind of stuff.
Yep. And I would think
I don't
that,
have I don't have a specific, but I think, it would just be good to get a little more, closer to it, I guess. I'm not saying get in the weeds, because I know that's like a taboo, but, a little closer to what's going on and not just everything that's positive. And I don't mean to suggest that there's a lot of negativity, but we all know that in any workplace or business, there's always issues, so.
I imagine that with the changes that we're talking about, the reporting, with not the administrative reporting or not the principal's reporting, we're gonna get more reports around the 5-year plan and items on that. And I think that there would be certain checkpoints that we would be getting information about that perhaps weren't before.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree, Nelda.
I do too, Milda.
Yeah.
I mean, those are big things that are happening in the district, things that are on that plan, so.
Right.
I mean, there was stuff, sorry.
Go ahead.
Wasn't there some, no, there was some stuff that Kevin, again, I'm going back to that report, Kevin, putting the possible those that were, again, it's not negativity, it's, where there's always going to be challenges and it's always going to be improvements. I mean, if we were perfect, we'd be golden, but, I mean, maybe all of us submit something and then, I don't know, on a scale, somehow scale it and, or assign numbers and then, I don't know, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but just pick something realistic, start off small, like with a couple, and then see how we do there and just kind of learn from that. Because I just don't want to pick goals and then just not have any, anything, criteria around it. And this report, what is our goal from those goals? Like, what do we want to get out of it? I mean, are we going to measure anything to make sure if it's successful or if it's not? I mean, it just some criteria around it too would be helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you make goals, they should be measurable, they should be attainable, they should be, smart, right? So I think that when we make those goals, I think that would be inherent in what they are.
Objective,
No, not objective, I mean.
Measures.
Measurable.
Ways to
Measurable
measure.
and different than objective.
Yeah.
Right, but, yeah. So I think.
We almost need like a project manager. I mean, I don't know, I mean, maybe you can call it something different, but, like somebody that can do that. That's, I don't know. This is
Sounds like she's volunteering.
Yeah. Like you, Nina?
Thank you, Nina, for volunteering.
I can do that,
Thanks, Nina. Great.
but I don't think that's what I'm supposed to do, but. But it's just something like that, because I think it is, it's helping projects, and it's also having somebody available to kind of get over those roadblocks that come up, you know, kind of have have somebody help things along. Again, depending on what it is, but it's also having somebody there to go to if there is a problem. Anyway.
Okay.
Can I just ask you, it just made me think, when you mentioned that we're going to change the format of the meeting a little bit, is that what you said earlier?
Yep.
I mean, I think in those discussions, it might lend itself a little more to having that conversation, because the other thing we don't want to do is get buried under goals either, you know? You want to have 3 or 4 that are you know, things that you can actually work on or try to attain. Once you get rid of it and go on to something else. So maybe some of this will evolve just in the format change.
Exactly, that's what Kevin was saying, yeah. I think so.
I don't want to get bogged down in goals, but I do think that we need goals to be able to help navigate us. And I think that that's exactly what we were talking about in this process, that people would prefer not to just be receiving information, but they want to be able to articulate meaningful questions back to administration. And so without goals, it's hard to articulate questions.
Okay, so I will get Joanna's notes, I will pass them out to people and look for feedback. Thank you. Item 8A, warrants.
Move the warrants be approved as presented.
Thank you, Alan. Second, Sally?
Yeah.
Any discussion
I
about
was
the warrants?
thinking of goals.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 9-0. Item 8B, superintendent's report.
Well, I apologize to everybody, but I have a fairly long list tonight. And you heard from me, but kind of there's a few big things that I just want to talk about. First off, we started discussion last a little bit about the process of hiring a new high school principal. I just wanted to lay that out a little bit more, just slightly more, because people have been asking me when will that be posted, things like that. We're looking at beginning to post the position around the beginning of December, which is a little early, but I already see that there's some high school principal positions already on School Spring for next year, so I don't think it's ever too early. So we're gonna get that out relatively early. I've asked Bill, since he's up there anyway, that he facilitate the search on this. And it would be my hope, through the process, which will begin beginning of December, as far as starting to get names and things, it would be my hope that by February, early March, we could have something in place.
February.
Yeah. I think it'd be better to just have it done if we can. And with the full realization that in Vermont and elsewhere, it's always a challenge to find top administrators. They're not out there. But if we start early, it's my hope that we can get that going. So, were you gonna say something? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
No, you want me to.
I just want to mention, if you haven't already seen it, we were at a Rise Vermont awards ceremony a couple weeks ago, and we received a couple awards. We received the Greatest Ripple Effect Award, and that came from our wellness committee, our work and our wellness policy. And the name came from the fact that when you throw a rock in the water and it ripples, it just expands. And their feeling is that Maple Run is a good example of how that ripple can turn out throughout the community with wellness. I thought it was very nice. And they also took a picture of a Messenger article that was in last year about the health policy, and when the governor came up to talk to us about it. And they gave us this all framed with a frame shop for, so it was very, very nice. It was a very nice evening. A couple weeks ago, I talked to you in apocalyptic terms around the special ed information that we had received lately, that we had been told that I wanted to warn you guys that when budget time came, we were going to be very concerned, and that this agency of education was putting out guidelines that was going to be very, very hurtful to school districts, taking things that were always being paid for special ed and saying the part of that was going to be in gen ed funding, which would hurt us terribly. We weren't the only ones in that boat. All of Vermont was. There was huge pushback. People were prepared to go and sue the AOE over this. They felt they had wrong information. And last week it was pushed back. And something came out from the Secretary of Education saying that would not happen. So we're feeling a little bit better, and Martha her blood pressure's down 10 points. Because we can, and Andrea. So we're not gonna have to be concerned about that in the short term. We still have Act 173, which I've talked to you about, which is still so far up in the air that nobody seems to know, but that's a couple years away. Just a informational thing that Jack and I will be at Lake Maury Thursday and Friday. Jack will be there as your representative for the Vermont School Boards Association meetings, and we'll be at those, and we'll also be at the workshops that we're going on, and I'll be at the workshops. And the final thing, I just want to personally and publicly thank a few people around this room, because I think they put in a heroic effort over the last month to 6 weeks, and they need to be recognized. I'm specifically talking about Bill and Heather and Preston and Sarah, who's not here, and our Dean of Students, Matt Sloan. You guys have come in, we found a problem, we've been working on it, you took it, you have, within 4 to 6 weeks, started to make changes up there. It's beginning to smooth out. Faculty are feeling better. There's been some good in-service going on. Some discipline things have been changed for what seems to be the better. You're moving forward with the proficiencies, and it's continuing, and I'm hearing some good things. I just want to thank you.
Do you mean discipline, like different departments? Or
No,
different
just student
behavioral
behavior issues. Some consistencies put into place. But thank you, and it's not done. The work has just started, but I believe the right people in the right place, and they're gonna move forward with it. And we will keep everybody updated on it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
that's it.
Well, that's too bad. Jason talked more than that.
That's it for 12 months though.
No more. Item 8C, board announcements.
Well, I could say that I've had, since our last meeting, I've had a couple of different adults talk to me about cursive writing. One, a boy who was a middle schooler, and this was a relative of this lady, and he had actually wanted to learn cursive writing. He recognized that it was needed. He wanted to be able to know how to write a signature, and he wanted to know how to read it. And that happened also with another of the women who had a
Yeah, listen, I
relative
got Catholic
had a student
education.
who had graduated from BFA, another student who had graduated and couldn't read cursive writing. So I will be bringing those up as those events occur.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And she's been very good about giving the articles and
Jeff, I was able to attend Financial Literacy Day. I spent 4 hours at BFA this morning with groups of students in the career exploration classes where their money is deposited into a checkbook and they are given the task of going through and providing for themselves. They have to meet with insurance and housing and student loans, and if they decide to have a family, the costs associated with that. And watching these dozens, over 100 kids come through and realize, well, I have to get another job, or maybe I shouldn't get a brand new car. Like some of these real life things that happen in a really low risk environment with their peers and with supportive community members. It was a really nice opportunity. I was glad I got to do
Oh, absolutely.
It's
Thank
a
you.
wonderful
It's so important.
event.
Yeah, it is.
Susan?
I'd like to give a shout out to the Tech Center students that were out just before Halloween visiting the rehab place and placing pumpkins of different designs in there. It was really
I
neat.
think MedProfession says that, right?
Unfortunately, I was in the quarantine area. I couldn't see that. That's, I could get outside to look at what they had done, and they do a great job. They come up during the spring and plant flowers and do all the work. So, Leanne, if you're there, thank them for their
Thanks,
fine work. I know you're
And our next meeting on November 20th is at the Tech Center, so
Correct.
appropriate.
Well, I would say one thing, I had a student shadow me today from one of the high schools.
Nice.
Which happens fairly often, but what she was talking about was going to community college and recognizing that to become an assistant level physical therapist or recognizing the expense of college and considering her debt load compared to entry level salary and with a PT being an entry level doctorate and the whole 9 years. So it was nice to hear that students are considering really kind of looking at their options because I think the push is 4-year college, you know, or it certainly has been. That's been my experience.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, item 9, agenda items for future meetings. I have 2 things that came to mind. One would be, it'd be great if Bill could talk about what the principal search process would be like, do a presentation on that. And then there's a group of people, of community members who are looking at building a new facility at Collins Pearly. So I know they're going to want to give a presentation to us in the next, they've already met with the Collins Pearly board, and they're going to want to talk to us and see if they can get our approval for them to proceed. And that should be the next month, I'm imagining.
What do you mean a new facility? Like a big new facility
A
or
big new
another house?
facility, yeah. I mean, they want to have it be a multi-use facility that would include another ice rink
Okay.
and other non-ice stuff.
It's not going to be like an actionable item, right? It's going to be like an informational presentation.
Yep, no, this will be informational, and then we'll talk about it at some point and get back to them. I just am throwing out there that that'll be on there in the next month.
I'm just, probably doesn't need to be on there, but we had talked about making sure that there's access for staff for parking when the construction happens. And I just would like to really
Yep.
push for that to happen. Just think that that's an accommodation that we can, try to offer to people, especially people who might have mobility issues or whatnot. But just making sure that, that we're being thoughtful about that.
If you could make sure, Bill, that that's covered under a future BFA construction update.
but,
When, and
yeah, that'd be a good idea. That works out. Yeah.
But downtown.
What'd you say?
I was
Down
saying
Barton
Swan,
Swan.
having Barton Swan, it's like, that works, yeah.
So I'd like to see something about the National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, and because I am very much I'm not the greatest supporter of technology, as you can probably tell. And we spend a lot of time on that today, but I am totally in favor of a more rigorous education because I think that's affecting learning. And I would love to hear something about the plan to deal with the reading and math scores that were indicated to be just above the national averages. I don't see as a good position. So I hope that I would like to hear about what's planned. Maybe it's going to be a state plan. I have no idea. Maybe it's going to be a local plan, but I definitely want to hear more about that on future agendas.
Yeah, there was a commentary that I read today by a member of the State Board of Ed that I'll send to you.
Okay, great. Thank
I'll
you.
send to everybody. But
Yeah, I don't want
it
to
was
forget
interesting,
about it.
related to that.
I don't want to, just disregard it. It's important.
Kevin, were we gonna get more final scores? Because I remember before it was like a preliminary review of the snapshot. And I think that you were gonna come back with more.
Yeah, they've delayed again.
You're talking specifically about the
You're
state
talking about the
snapshot?
IFR stuff?
Yeah, like just the 2019, SBAC.
Oh, the SBAC stuff.
Yeah,
There is another thing called snapshot that the
Right.
state was doing.
no, I understand that.
Scores, sure.
Yeah. That might help with some goals as well.
And as I mentioned earlier, at our next meeting, we'll be bringing the prioritization of goals.
Yep. Okay. All right, we do not have need for an executive session, so seeing as we are at the end of our agenda, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Kevin.